Yeah, it's live. Okay. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy every bit of this session today. So, today we have with us Miri Rodriguez. She is the global head of internships at Microsoft, a creative journalist, and the author of the book Brand Storytelling. She has earned several rewards in digital marketing, customer experience, and is ranked as one of the top in demand speakers at leading industry conferences around the world. Today, in this session, Miri will share with us her personal examples and some of the key strategies to build and leverage your own story and effectively brand yourself for success. We are honored to have you today with us.
Thank you so much, Kashish, and thank you everyone who's joining us today. Apologize for the delay. We had some little bit of technical issues on my end, but such is technology, right? Thank you again for joining, and I hope this session today will be enlightening to you, something that you may not have heard before, especially when it comes to branding, because a lot of people will associate branding with a professional LinkedIn profile or with a professional resume, and all of those are assets of a brand, not truly the brand. In fact, I've learned in my own experience that branding is not so much who you say you are on those assets, but how you make people feel. In fact, one of the greatest storytellers of our time, Maya Angelou, said it best. She said that people will not remember what you said or what you did, they'll remember how you made them feel. And so for me, this journey is something that I am personally invested in and teaching people how to brand themselves the best way, because a brand goes beyond a title, a professional title or a professional goal. It really is who we are to the world, who we are with our own aspirations. What are those aspirations? And for me, I learned in this trajectory of 8 years that building a brand has some key elements that we have to consider. And as you see here, these are 5 elements for me that have ranked true in my journey. The first one is a mission. We have to have a mission for our brand. From a marketing perspective, I am a marketer. We always have to think about what is the mission of our brand, whether it's a corporate brand or not. And so from a personal brand perspective, this is something you also have to consider. What is your mission? Have you given yourself a mission? Why do you stand for something? What is that stance? So think about that mission before you even begin to build assets for that brand. If you don't have a mission, if you don't have core values that are aligned to that mission, then you truly don't stand for anything specific and your brand will not be authentic in essence. You have to have attributes that delineate the brand and that people can recognize every single time. When you think about people that you admire and the brand that they have, whether these are influencers, these are personas, people, mentors that you know, they have a certain attribute about them that you that has called out to you and it called your attention. So attributes are important, and being consistent with those attributes is also a good element of a brand. Character is another one. Character is who you are, those core values that you do business and life with. What are those things for you? You know that we have been given or instituted core values by our parents, by our culture, by our religions, by many different influencers, by society. But it comes to a point when you get to decide what those are for yourself. You get to build those core set values for yourself and the attributes and the character that those build. Story. What is your story? All of us have different stories and we have one origin story. In fact, a lot of people ask me the same question: what makes me stand out? What will make me stand out? And the answer is actually you. It's your story. It's your origin story. Nobody has your lived experience other than you. You are the one person that has lived your life and has learned these from these lived experiences. So from that, you get to learn more and you get to share that with the world. That's the insight that you bring that nobody else can bring. SEO, that stands for search engine optimization. And basically, that's your digital presence. When I embarked on this journey many years ago, our digital presence wasn't as important as it is today. Today is actually critical. And we've seen through a global pandemic that digital is where it's at. So if you Google yourself right now and you don't find yourself, that's a problem. You basically don't exist. If you Google yourself and it's not who you are, then that's another problem. And if you Google yourself and you find content that you don't like, that's another problem. So you get to actually manage your SEO. You get to choose what content people are seeing and what they're learning about you online. You get to do this. You are the CEO of your SEO. So this is how you think about your brand and the elements of that brand. And of course, for me, this was a journey, as I mentioned before. I had not gone through this. Nobody had taught me this. Nobody had coached me through this idea. I started my journey 8 years ago when I first embarked on my adventure at Microsoft. Microsoft called me and I accepted the invitation to come and to work for this wonderful company. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome coming in. In fact, I never thought that I could work for such a company. I never even applied for such a company because I didn't think that I could. And so for me, it was really, I was very elated, as you can see here. This is my first profile picture, at the idea of working for this incredible company. And so when I started there, my smile didn't last too long because I actually began to get bullied by 4 women. And this lasted about a year. And this experience really taught me many things. But one of them is actually I decided to quit. One day I was so tired after this experience that I was living, and someone asked me not to quit. And they said, "Hey, Miri, you need to stay at Microsoft." And I was like, "Why?" They're like, "Well, because Microsoft needs you." And I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't understand why Microsoft would need me. And I realized at that moment that if I did come back, that if I did stay, up until that time, I had lived with no purpose. I had lived with what I thought society wanted me to do. I had I had gone to school, I had graduated, I had gotten married, I had a couple of kids, I had gotten a job, and I was good. But truly, I didn't have a specific personal mission to my life. I had a bunch of mixed attributes. So basically, I didn't really have a consistent brand to myself. I could be one thing or the other. I wasn't really consistent in who I was to people and how I showed up. I had no character definition. Back to these attributes, I really didn't know what my stance was, what I stood for, what were my opinions, how serious I was about these opinions. I had no story, even though I had many stories. I truly had no personal story. I wasn't using or leveraging this story for my benefit and for the benefit of others. And if you Googled me or binged me back then, you'll probably just find my address or my parents' address. So that was me 8 years ago, and that's what compelled me to think, what next? Why is this important? And it became actually one of the most important things I ever did for myself, because being a woman in tech, I learned quickly that nobody would give me a platform unless I asked for it or unless I built it myself. I learned very quickly that it was a very lonely journey. And so I had to actually build my brand and build my voice and share my voice with the world and get away from my fears of doing that, because it was even more scary to think that if I didn't have a voice, then I would be nobody. And I was someone. So I had to give myself a mission, and I did. I came back the next day and I created this statement based on my experience with marketing. I knew that in marketing, you always create brand missions. So I borrowed from that and I decided I'm going to create a personal brand mission for myself. So you can use this or you can use any other template, but the idea here is that you build yourself a mission. Why do you exist? Give yourself that purpose. Nobody else will. You have to give it for yourself. And for me, it began with this first idea of, who am I? How do I show up first? What is my baseline? Who am I today to the world? And then I can build from that. I can aspire to something from there. And for me, it was important to actually ask that question to many people, which I did. So I encourage you to think about that as well. If you have not thought about intentionally building your brand so far, and you want to embark on that journey, the first step would be ask people, how do you show up? That is a general, very broad question, but it's a question that's going to compel you to think what promise you're making to people today, because your brand is a promise. How are you landing your content? How are you landing who you are? How do you show up on social media? How does your email land with other people, your TikTok and your content on Instagram? All of these are assets of your brand, not just your resume or your LinkedIn profile. So it's beyond that. I sit in university recruiting today, and I can tell you, we also look at your social media channels. We do. We look at social media content because it gives us pieces of that story. So you are sharing who you are. People are tagging you online. And so we're seeing who you are beyond just the resume or the LinkedIn profile. So create your set of attributes, overarching attributes, first by understanding who you are. How do you show up? I recommend you do this with an anonymous survey, for example, and send it to people who you know they care about you and they want to see you win, so that you're able to understand your baseline and understand what attributes you can play up and play down. People will tell you things, they'll give you some good ideas, and you can actually recognize these data points and make them part of your catalog of information that you're going to use later on to build that brand. The second piece of this is actually built through storytelling. The world is a big place. It's a really big place, and maybe you won't reach 8 billion people. Maybe you will, and that'll be amazing if you do. But if you can't start with 8 billion people, start with one, start with two. Give yourself a target audience. For me, what I decided was, after that experience of bullying, I was like, well, if I'm getting bullied, maybe other people are as well. They're women. And so I actually decided to target as my audience early in career women in tech. That became my target audience. And I wanted to do that in order to, I gave myself a legacy, in order to contribute to basically closing that gap that exists in the gender inequality in tech. And so for me, that became my own mission. Out of my own experience and my story, I decided to build something that was important to me. And so this looks a little bit like this. This is an illustration that I'm going to show you to use your second data set for your brand story building. Think about your origin story. Think about the things that have happened to you. Up until now, you probably have not built your own story or have not been intentional to build the next chapters. And that's what happened to me. But I had to go back. I had to think about not only how I show up, but I had to go back to my origin story to understand more about who I was, the moments that made and shaped me. And so this is called the origin story illustration. It's how you can actually build your origin story. This idea is like a blank sheet of paper. You would take the first data point, which is the day that you were born. And I know I'm old, so don't make fun of me. This is the idea that you're actually going to begin to think and map out those moments in your life that are encoded in your memory. And they may not seem too important. They may not seem too big in your mind, but if they're encoded in your memory, it's for a reason. So as detailed as you can get, I won't be detailed on mine, you begin to build the next memories after you were born. What is that next very powerful memory? I'm only going to go halfway here, as I said, on mine, but just to illustrate what this would look like for you in your own time, that you would do this, because this will help you understand some patterns of who you are, some categories, some ideas that you can create. And with these two data points that you'll have, how you show up in your origin story, then you can begin to understand more the idea of using story for your branding. Using story and understanding what is not storytelling and what is. Storytelling is not that set of information and data. It's not facts. It's not your resume. It's not your LinkedIn profile. It's actually taking all of that information and using a character, a plot, and a conclusion to transfer it emotionally to people. It's basically you saying, instead of saying, hey, I graduated from this school, such and such school with this GPA, you're saying my parents had to work 3 jobs to get me into the school. And so that adds value, that adds story, that adds emotion to the outcome that's on your resume. And people begin to empathize with you, begin to learn more about your core values. They understand that one of those core values may be hard work and achievement and empowerment. So that begins to resonate with people at the very human level. Storytelling begins with the idea that it's not just telling the story, but it's also designing your brand. So you actually engage in an environment where you're not just thinking about, hey, I'm going to go post something that's me branding myself, or I'm going to think of my next job or my dream job, and when I get there, I've achieved my brand. No, it's the multifaceted approach of who you are and how you design that for people. The way you brand yourself is how people will perceive you. It's not what people say, it's how you make people feel. And so it is up to you to deliver this brand and this experience for your customers and for your audiences. So what I've done is I've used the design thinking approach. It's a 5-step approach, which you may be very familiar with. It's a very creative approach. It's a fail-fast approach. Ideally, it's something that you continue to evolve because it's not always baked. It's not always, it's not always at its optimal state. You're testing it. And it's this idea that we are also never done. We're also evolving. We're also growing. I'm certainly not the person that I was 8 years ago, and I won't be 8 years from now. So this is a continuous approach to designing our own brand and our own story. And it begins and it actually ends with empathy. So when you think about this idea of empathy, you have to learn what that means. And I had to learn what that meant. I used design thinking in my own work when I began to do storytelling for core services engineering at Microsoft. And for me, it was important to think about empathizing with my audience and empathizing with myself. I actually had to learn that in the empathy piece, in the experience of empathy, I had to learn that your brand, your stories have to have something that I call the universal truth. Universal truth is something that people understand, that you don't have to explain. That's that feeling that you're going to evoke. For example, at Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Empowerment is our universal truth as a brand. We want to empower the world. And I don't have to explain empowerment. Everybody understands empowerment. So think about what that means for you. What is your universal truth? For me, with my girls, it was belonging. That is the word that is truth to me. It's my truth. I want women in tech to feel like they belong in the industry. And I did that because I didn't feel like I belonged at one point. So for me, it was important to make other people feel like they do. So you use your own stories, you use your own experiences to create a mission for yourself and for your brand. And you create that universal truth. I also learned that there were 3 levels of empathy. There's the cognitive empathy level, which is at the highest level where you zoom out. And there you are thinking about connecting with other humans. There you are exploring the humanity of your audience. When I think about this and how that sits in a practical way for brand storytelling or for personal branding, it's the way that I connect with my audience. For me to connect with a young woman in tech, I have to be relevant to that person. I have to dress in a certain way. I have to talk in a certain way. I have to present myself in a certain way so I can be relevant to that audience. I also serve different audiences. I have hybrid audiences. I have a male tech audience. I have a teenage audience. I have different types of audiences that I serve. So I play up and play down my attributes, but I have to get to know myself. I have to understand what those are so that I can serve them up or serve them down. For example, sarcasm is one of the things that came out in my How Do I Show Up? And now I know very well that with my younger women in career audience, sarcasm may not play well, may not land well with them. It will seem presumptuous. It will seem authoritative. So I don't use it. Now, with my male tech audience, that's something that they enjoy. It's witty, it's funny, it's what they like. So I do become sarcastic and I do play that up. So your attributes are something that you have that you can use up as strengths where they best serve your audience. That's cognitive empathy. The second one is emotional empathy. How do you show up in a way that you not only see that they're human, your audiences, but also recognize that you are human. Come in and meet them at their level. Show up less polished. Show up with problems. Show up with your human condition because we all have them. The more vulnerable you become, the more your brand is exposed as authentic. If I showed up all the time as Miri, the head of global internships, Miri, the author, Miri this and Miri that, and Miri, the award winner, everybody gets bored after a while. I don't want to just hear from Miri that. But if I show up as a mom, if I show up as a dog owner, if I show up as someone who has problems, because I do, then people begin to connect with me at the human level and they begin to empathize back. So I connect with my audience emotionally. The last level of empathy is compassionate empathy. It's a step of empathy where just like the illustration shows here, we open up our hearts and we say, okay, what am I feeling today? Why am I not at my best today? What's happening with me? And you don't have to do much with that, only to just take time to recognize how you're feeling, your emotions, how they look, so that you can then, with that practice, you can then become a better empath emotionally and then at the cognitive level. With this in mind, when you think about designing the story, designing your brand, when you empathize, then you understand that's an experience. You get to experience empathy for yourself and for others. And then you get to define that brand even better. You get to give yourself a mission. You get to think about your audience differently. You get to create characters and you get to build that plot and the conclusion and really aspire to a brand more and more. You get to do this for yourself. You get to give yourself the voice and the mission that you want. Your story mission will change. You may have different stories, and you should have different stories if you have different audiences. So begin to think about something like this, a quick statement on, hey, I'm going to dedicate this story to, and I want this story to help them do what, and make them feel what, back to that feeling. How are you going to leave your audience feeling? One of the things that for me I've learned in my experience, in my branding experience, is that people want 3 things from you, from a brand and from your content. They want to be educated or learn something from you, so be insightful. They want you to to inspire them. They want to be inspired. And they also want something personal from you. They want to feel like they're connecting with you personally. So inspirational, educational, and personal. 3 things that your content and your brand should be. So you get to ideate. That's step 3. I use this as a practice, as a tool. Scamper, it's a brainstorming tool that I use a lot in my storytelling practice because it enables me to think about the layers of my story, the layers of my brand. Who am I in my own story? What if I reversed something, eliminated something? What if I modified something? There's so many things that we can do with one story and serve it up in many different ways for different audiences. So ideate. Give yourself the idea. Give yourself the time to ideate and get creative. Ask yourself, if my brand had a color, what would it be? If my brand had a smell, what would it be? And visualize how your brand shows up in many different forms, how you create that feeling and immerse people into your brand more and more. How does it serve you at the professional level, you would ask? Well, your conversations change from with your manager from what is the next thing I need to do for my promotion to, hey, I understand my own mission. I gave myself a mission. How are you going to empower me to continue this mission for the world and for the company? The conversations change from an employer perspective when you're going for an interview to say, when somebody asks, hey, why should you work at Microsoft? Oh, well, because it's a great company. It's a big tech company. It's doing great things for the world. I love Microsoft. To, you know what? In my own story, I was able to empower myself this way. And so for me, empowerment is one of my core values. And I belong in the DNA. I share that DNA with Microsoft because it serves to empower the world. I want to be a part of that. So it changes the conversation when you ideate more and more in your story, your plot, and your conclusion. And then you begin to create concepts, ideas of how to deliver the content to your audience, to build your brand. Definitely the digital space is where you want to be, where you should be. But the channels are different. Should I be on TikTok? Should I be on Instagram? Really, I don't know. It really depends on what your mission is and who your audience is. I do definitely play with this idea. Here's an example of how I do this. I play on LinkedIn a whole lot. And I've learned in my testing that the more vulnerable I get on LinkedIn, the more reactions I get from people, the more connections I get. So the more human I show up, the better. And so it shows up authentic. And I use LinkedIn a lot as my testing platform. On Twitter, I have more of a techie audience. It's more of a male audience that I have there. My followers are males. And so for me, I use this platform to play up my sarcasm, my techie side, my Microsoft side. But on Instagram, I really dedicate this channel mostly to my girls, my audience, my primary audience. So you will see me talking a whole lot about women empowerment, being a queen, sisterhood, and these types of things. You see a lot more of the vulnerable side of me here. And all three of them doesn't mean that I'm not me. It means that I'm leveraging and I'm playing up or down, depending on my audience and my attributes. But I first have to know what they are and how they show up. And then people get curious. Who is this Miri putting a dog on Instagram, right? And my social presence is here now. I have a Google panel. I have a Bing panel. I haven't created any of these. Somebody did. And that's because people got curious about my humanity. People got curious to learn more about me. And I don't have an extraordinary story or brand. I just decided to share and give myself that mission. It is that important that you will build your brand for yourself and leave that legacy. We all want to do that. We want to immortalize ourselves to the world with our brand. So we have to do it. You do this by testing. You learn this by testing your own content, testing your own brand. Ask yourself, did my story, did my content evoke the emotion that I wanted from my audience? But you first have to define that emotion. Again, what is that for you? For me, it's belonging. I want people to connect with me and feel when they do that they belong. So I try to do that. I try to live that. I created my brand for that. What is yours? We all serve different purposes. So in conclusion, if it doesn't have a character, a plot, and a conclusion, it's not a story. It's not a brand. So you have to make sure that you build your character, you build the plot, you build the end goal, and give yourself that mission. Your story, your brand is for your audience. You have to have that audience, not to them, not just shooting blanks and throwing content out there. You're being intentional with your authenticity and your empathy. Ideate. Take time to build that brand, to get creative, test it, have fun with your brand, see where it can go, see how vulnerable you can get. I can tell you personally, the more vulnerable I get with my content, the more reactions I get. I know I said this before. And lastly, do it with your heart. It really is authentic when it comes from you. Ask yourself why. There's a lot of brands being built out there from a meism perspective, from getting the likes and getting the immediate gratification. A real brand is built over time. It has equity. Yes, it builds trust, and that takes time. So do it with heart. Ask yourself why, give yourself the mission, and build it for a long-lasting effect that goes beyond the professional, because that's only a part, an aspect of who you are. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoyed the session.
That was lovely to see that. So we have a few questions here with us, like around 2 to 3 questions. Would you like to take them?
Yes, of course.
Awesome. So the first question that I would like to pick from these is, what is your recipe for success? Like, what do you think is the recipe for success?
Yeah. So I think the recipe for success is you defining your own success. All of us have different goals in life. Don't let society, your parents, your teacher, your boss tell you what success looks like. You get to define that. I had a moment in my life when I was 30 where I realized the path where I was on, what I thought my success was, wasn't. I wanted to be a certain thing, a certain level by a certain age. And when I didn't reach that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. And that's not true. I realized that's not where I wanted to be. That was what I had put on myself based on other people's expectations. So I defined my own success. For me, defining my own success was saying at the end of my life, I know I'm different things. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a worker. And that people will tell when I die, people will say she was the best worker, she was the best mom, she tried her best to be the best at everything that she is. That is success for me. For you, it may be completely different. But make sure it's your own conviction of success so that when you reach it, when you work for that goal, you know it's yours and nobody else's.
That's wonderful. So one of the most like asked questions that we have here is how to increase focus while living in a social media and digital era where the attention span is even less than a second.
Yeah. So it's back to that long haul approach, right? It's not an immediate gratification. You're going to have to get consistent with people. People are going to want that consistency from you. So you build that over time. It's truly not about attention or focus. It's about grabbing people by the heart, connecting with people by the heart, and that will make people grow. That will make people stop. That will make people click when you grab their heart. So how do you do that? Back to what I was sharing: being empathetic, understanding what you deliver to them, being intentional with your content, and not just for the likes. That doesn't really have value. What has value is people really tuning in to what you're saying because it comes from the heart. We are now living in a digital age, but it doesn't stop us from delivering our heart, from delivering an intention, from delivering an energy that is received on the other end.
All right. So the next question that we have is, um, can you just share tips on the ideal resume for an SD internship at Microsoft?
Can I share tips on what? I'm sorry, for internships?
Resume building, yeah.
Resume building. Yes, of course, that always shows up. Absolutely. So, just as I was saying, it's important that you share your story and your core values and who you are. One of the things that captures attention is if you use the top headline, which is basically the main real estate of your resume, to use that as a storytelling tool, as a storytelling space where you can actually, instead of saying what your objective is, we all know the objective is to get a job, right? So instead of getting very technical in that piece, use that to introduce yourself and your story. Hi, I'm Miri. My core values are these. I really am looking forward to working with a company that shares the same core values, that shares the same missions in life. And that's why it's important that you build yours first so that you can actually explain that and showcase that. So use that real estate to tell a little bit of your story instead of just your objective. And then use the rest of the resume, not only just to don't explain what you've done. I've worked in this job and this is what I did in this job, but actually explain your accomplishments on that job. So if you were a data scientist intern, okay, put data scientist intern, and what is it that you accomplished during that internship? So not just the actual job that you did, the work that you did, but what were the outcomes and what were the results and the learnings? So again, it's back to that storytelling idea. It's what you were learning and how that has shaped you and what you have done in the past. Those accomplishments are very important. To Microsoft, we also look at volunteering spaces and how involved you're in your community. So really highlight organizations that you're a part of and things that you have been, that you contributed to and volunteering to. So that's also very important. So highlight those things as well.
All right. So the next question that we have is, while making a new brand, what should we focus more on? Design theory or graphics and communicating through that, or empathy and stories that is behind the brand?
Yeah, so it's all of it, right? So the focus really has to be, it starts with that mission. So you have to focus first on what the mission of that brand will be. And everything else is the add-ons to that, the assets of that. So yes, empathy starts with you building that empathy, building an empathy with yourself and with your audience, and then saying, okay, who is my audience? What do I want to serve with my brand? And then you begin to add to those assets. If your story or your brand is going to serve a certain cohort, for me, it was those young women early in career. So for me, it was important to connect with them at their level. I began to learn the cohort. I began to understand that demographic, what they like and what they don't like, what makes me relevant or not. If I show up a certain way or if I speak a certain way, they're not going to connect with me. So I had to change my language. I had to change my, play up some attributes, play down some attributes to connect with our audience. So then the main piece, the first piece is that empathy level, connect with your audience at the empathetic level so you can build the rest of it as you go.
That's wonderful. Okay, so the next question that we have is related to your book. So Bhanvi has asked, like, what inspired you to write that book and how it changed your life?
Yeah. So, what inspired me was a woman who believed in me. When I didn't believe in myself, I never thought that I would be able to write a book. I never thought of writing a book. In fact, I thought that was not for me. And so it was really interesting when someone, a commissioning editor who happened to be a woman, reached out to me. I was in London at the time, doing a speaking engagement. And she said, "Hey, Miri, you should really make this a book." And she insisted for a while. I rejected the idea because I didn't believe in myself. So it inspired me to know someone believed in me more than I believed in myself. And that's when I learned that, when she insisted, I did it. I did it because she believed in me. So sometimes are those opportunities when we downplay or doubt our own abilities, and someone actually sees them and believes them. So take all our opportunities, even when you don't feel like you can. If it's an opportunity that comes to you, just say yes, and you'll see what great things happen to you.
Absolutely. So the last question that we have is, should one focus on becoming more successful, accomplished, and skilled, and then start building their own personal brand, or should they just do it right away?
Yeah, so I think it's a journey that you embark on. It's almost like building the plane while you're flying it, right? You're building your brand and you're also working on the brand itself. And that's the journey of the brand. So it's both. You're embarking on the journey of who you are and who you're becoming. And as you're becoming that, you're sharing that with the world. And that's what people appreciate. Nobody wants to just see just the success. Oh, she's so successful. Yeah, but there was a process there. There were ups and downs, and there was learnings, and there was failures. And so we want to learn that process so that we also, can have that insight. And so you have an opportunity to share that. And I think that's where the authenticity comes from, that you can start now, and you can also say, hey, I'm just starting in my journey. I'm starting my career, or I'm midway through my career. And it never ends. I mean, my brand is certainly evolving all over, and it will continue to evolve. So I don't know where it's going to go next. And that's the beauty of it. And I think that's the beauty of life in general, that we actually get to evolve and grow.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Miri, for coming in. It was amazing to have you here. I would like to thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule and coming here to share your experiences with us. I also enjoyed the way you target young women in tech and share your story. When you said that failure taught you everything you needed to go beyond the mere telling of stories and into the magical world of story designing, it was an honor and privilege to hear you, and I'm quite sure that each and every one of us is leaving this conference a tad bit smarter than they were when they came in. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the event.